The Nuremberg Trials, a historic event that not only marked the end of World War II, but also opened a new chapter in the pursuit of responsibility for war crimes. After the atrocities committed by the Nazi regime, the world needed to answer an important question: who would be responsible? At Nuremberg, the Nazi leaders faced justice in a trial that forever changed the way humanity viewed war crimes and international justice. This was not just a trial of criminals, but a fight for justice, morality, and the survival of international legal principles. The Nuremberg Trials were a series of international trials held from 1945 to 1949 to try the senior leaders of the Nazi Reich for war crimes and crimes against humanity committed during World War II. This is one of the most important legal events in history, having a profound influence on the development of international legal principles and human rights. After World War II ended, the Allied nations, including the Soviet Union, the United States, Great Britain, and France, wanted to ensure that Nazi leaders would be brought to justice and held accountable for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and acts of aggression. In August 1945, the victorious nations held a conference in Potsdam where they decided on the trials of German war criminals. They eventually agreed to hold the trials in Nuremberg, a German city that was home to important Nazi political buildings and where Nazi party rallies were held throughout the 1930s. The Nuremberg trials were intended to publicly condemn the crimes committed by the Nazi regime, as well as serve as a way to restore justice and prevent similar crimes in the future. The Nuremberg trials focused primarily on three main types of crimes that Nazi leaders were accused of: war crimes, including acts of aggression and attacks on other countries, as well as acts that violated the laws of war, such as killing prisoners of war and destroying civilian property. Crimes against humanity, including acts of genocide, forced labor, boycotts, and acts that harmed innocent civilians, especially in concentration camps and political purges. Crimes against peace, including acts of aggression and preparations for war, in violation of the Treaty of Versailles and other international regulations. The Nuremberg trials were held in Nuremberg, Germany, and took place in several sessions. The first and most famous, known as the main trial, began on November 20, 1945, and lasted until October 1, 1946. A total of 24 high-ranking Nazi leaders were put on trial during the main trial, including notable figures such as Hermann Göring, Rudolf Hess, Albert Speer, and Ernst Kaltenbrunner. However, not all of the defendants were tried. Some, such as Adolf Hitler, Heinrich Himmler, and Joseph Goebbels, committed suicide before being arrested, and others were not prosecuted due to health or political status. Key defendants included Hermann Göring, deputy leader of the German Reich, commander of the German Luftwaffe, and one of Adolf Hitler's closest associates. During his trial, Göring attempted to justify his actions, but was ultimately convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Göring committed suicide before he could be executed. Rudolf Hess, deputy Führer of the Nazi Party, who flew to England in 1941 in the hope of negotiating peace, but was captured. He was convicted of conspiracy against peace and sentenced to life in prison, although many believed he was either coerced or insane when he made the trip. Albert Speer, Nazi Minister of Armaments and Supplies, who was responsible for the use of forced labor in the nation's factories. Speer was the only one of the German leadership to admit responsibility for the crimes committed by the Nazi regime. Speer was sentenced to 20 years in prison and was released in 1966, becoming one of the only Nazis to make self-critical statements. Ernst Kaltenbrunner, head of the German State Security Service, RSHA, which oversaw the Gestapo and other Nazi intelligence operations. Kaltenbrunner was convicted of war crimes and genocide and executed by hanging. Regarding the legal process, the Nuremberg trials were organized by the International Military Tribunal, IMT, representing the Allied nations. The trials were conducted according to a strict legal process. Each defendant had the right to a defense attorney, although many of the defendants' defense attorneys were challenged because of the crimes the defendants had committed. At the trial, a large amount of evidence, including documents, videos, and witness statements, was presented during the trials to prove the crimes the defendants had committed. Finally, and most lofty, were the verdicts. The defendants were sentenced to various sentences, ranging from death, hanging, to life imprisonment, or long prison sentences. In the main trial, 12 of the 24 defendants were sentenced to death and executed by hanging. 3 were sentenced to life imprisonment, and 7 others were sentenced to fixed terms of imprisonment. 3 defendants were declared innocent. The Nuremberg Trials set an important precedent in international law, a milestone in the development of international law. The trial established the principle that political, military, and industrial leaders can be prosecuted for international crimes, regardless of whether they committed these acts under the direction of the state. The Nuremberg Principles, which emerged from the trials, became the foundation of modern international law, including: those who commit war crimes cannot justify themselves by saying they were merely following orders from above. Crimes against humanity can be prosecuted by international courts, even when there is no formal war. The trial also laid the foundation for later international courts, such as the International Criminal Court, ICC, to try international crimes, especially war crimes and genocide committed around the world. In addition to the main trial, there were several other trials held in Nuremberg and other cities in Germany to try lesser-level war criminals. These trials were called the subsequent Nuremberg Trials. They tried lower-ranking Nazi officials, doctors, SS officers, and others involved in war crimes. The Nuremberg Trials were not only about punishing war criminals, but also about questions about morality, power, and individual responsibility during times of war. One important question it raised was, can a state be justified in committing crimes in the name of the state? However, the trial was also controversial because some felt that the trial focused only on Nazi war crimes and did not address similar acts committed by the victorious nations. A dissenting opinion argued that only the Nazi leaders were responsible for the war and its crimes. Many felt that the victorious nations, especially the Soviet Union, had also committed similar acts but were not brought to justice. There was also criticism of the lack of fairness in the trials of the victorious Allies and the lack of transparency in the documents about what happened during the investigations. The Nuremberg Trials marked a turning point in international legal history, paving the way for the development of international courts and the formation of the principles of modern international law. Despite the controversy, the importance of the trial in highlighting that no one can escape responsibility for crimes against humanity.